The entrance that changed everything. The glass doors of the luxury auto showroom in the heart of Dublin city centre swung open with a soft chime. But the man who entered was far from the typical clientele the showroom was accustomed to. James Foster, a tall, elderly black man, stepped inside wearing a simple sweater and old sneakers, a stark contrast to the polished marble floors and gleaming surfaces of the showroom's modern minimalist design. His quiet presence contrasted sharply with the vibrant silver sports cars and bustling customer consultants who moved like clockwork around their wealthy clients. James paused near the entrance, his worn duffel bag resting against his side as he gazed at the sleek vehicles that lined the showroom floor. Each car was a masterpiece of engineering and luxury, their price tags large enough to make most people blink twice. Yet there was no hesitation in James's eyes, just a quiet determination. He wasn't here to browse or daydream. He had a purpose. From across the room, Derek Hughes, one of the showroom's senior customer consultants, caught sight of James. Derek was a man in his late 30s with a meticulously tailored suit, a dazzling smile, and an air of self-importance. His sharp eyes scanned James from head to toe, lingering on the frayed hem of his sweater and the scuff marks on his sneakers. A subtle smirk formed on his lips as he turned to his colleague, whispering loud enough to be overheard. "Looks like someone walked into the wrong place. Must have thought this was a used car lot," Derek said with a chuckle. The other consultants laughed politely, but one or two shifted uncomfortably, glancing at James. The elderly man's calm demeanor and upright posture hinted that he wasn't as out of place as Derek assumed. James approached the front desk, where a young woman named Emily Carter greeted him with a practiced smile, but her expression faltered slightly when she noticed his attire. She quickly recovered, her tone polite, but distant. "Good afternoon, sir. How can I help you?" she asked, her voice edged with the faintest hint of doubt. James met her gaze and smiled warmly. "Good afternoon. I'd like to speak to someone about purchasing a car." Emily blinked, momentarily thrown off by his confidence. "Of course. Did you have a specific model in mind?" "The silver sports car by the window," James said, pointing toward the showroom's centerpiece vehicle. It was the kind of car that turned heads, a symbol of status and wealth. Emily hesitated, glancing over at Derek, who was now watching the interaction with barely concealed amusement. She cleared her throat. "Let me find someone to assist you." Before she could move, Derek strode over, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. He exuded confidence, his smile wide and insincere. "I'll take it from here, Emily," he said smoothly. Turning to James, he extended a hand. "Derek Hughes, senior consultant. You're interested in the sports car, you say?" James shook his hand firmly. "That's right." Derek raised an eyebrow, his tone shifting to one of patronizing doubt. "It's a fine choice, but I should let you know this particular model starts at 250,000 euros and goes up depending on the customizations. It's not exactly affordable." James's expression didn't waver. "I understand. I'd still like to know more about it." Derek hesitated, his smile faltering for a brief moment. He wasn't used to clients like James, clients who didn't fit the mold of wealth and privilege, but instead of dropping the act, he decided to test James further. "Of course," Derek said, his tone dripping with condescension. "We'll just need to confirm a few details first. You know, standard procedure." James nodded patiently. "Take your time." As Derek led James toward the sleek silver car, his voice carried across the room, loud enough for others to hear. It's always great to see people dream big, isn't it? This car represents the pinnacle of luxury and success. Owning it is like making a statement to the world. James didn't respond, his steady gaze fixed on the car. He walked around it slowly, running his hand along the polished surface. His movements were deliberate, as though he were studying every detail, every curve. Nearby, a small crowd of showroom employees and customers had begun to gather, their whispers filling the air. "Do you think he's serious?" one consultant murmured. "He doesn't look like he can afford a car like that," another said. "Maybe he's just here to waste time," someone else added. But James remained undeterred, his focus unshaken. He turned to Derek and asked calmly, "How soon could this car be ready for purchase?" Derek's smirk widened. "Well, that depends on a few things. Financing, credit checks, deposits. You understand." James met his gaze, his voice firm yet polite. "Let's not waste time, then. I'll be paying up front." The room went silent. For a moment, it felt as though time had stopped. Derek's confident facade cracked, his smile faltering as he struggled to process what he'd just heard. "You'll be paying up front?" Derek repeated, his tone skeptical. "That's correct," James said evenly. "In cash." The weight of his words hung in the air, shocking not only Derek, but everyone within earshot. Emily, who had been quietly observing from the desk, felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment as she realized the assumptions she had made about James. What would you have done if you were in James's shoes? Let us know in the comments below. Have you ever experienced a moment where you were unfairly judged? We'd love to hear your story. The tension in the showroom was palpable, and it was clear that this interaction was far from over. James Foster had just turned the tables, but the lesson he was about to deliver would leave an indelible mark on everyone present. Derek Hughes stood frozen, his polished confidence slipping, as James Foster's declaration echoed through the luxury auto showroom. The elderly man's calm yet unwavering tone carried a gravity that silenced even the faintest whispers from the gathered onlookers. For a moment, Derek looked like a man scrambling for footing, unsure whether to dismiss James outright or play along, hoping to catch him in a misstep. "Well," Derek began, forcing a strained smile, "cash transactions of this magnitude aren't exactly common. Of course, I'll need to speak to our operations manager, Robert Campbell, to verify this arrangement." James inclined his head slightly. "Please do." Derek turned sharply, his face betraying his irritation as he strode toward the office at the back of the showroom. As soon as he was out of sight, the murmurs began anew, louder this time. "Did he really say cash?" one of the customer consultants asked, leaning toward Emily Carter. Emily nodded, her face pale. "He did, and he seemed serious." Another consultant scoffed. "There's no way. Who carries that kind of money? He's probably bluffing." Emily glanced toward James, who remained near the silver sports car, running his hand thoughtfully over the hood. Despite the hushed skepticism swirling around him, his demeanor remained unshaken, calm, patient, as though he had all the time in the world. Behind closed doors, Derek entered Robert Campbell's office, his composure fraying. Robert, a composed man with graying hair and an air of quiet authority, looked up from his desk. "Derek?" Robert greeted, raising an eyebrow at his colleague's disheveled state. "What's going on?" Derek exhaled sharply. "There's an unusual situation on the floor. An older man, clearly out of his depth, claims he wants to buy the silver sports car outright, says he's paying in cash. Robert leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. And? Derek blinked, caught off guard. And it's obviously a bluff. Look at him. He doesn't belong here. He's wearing old sneakers, for God's sake. Robert's eyes narrowed slightly, and he rose from his seat, adjusting his tie. I've been in this business long enough to know appearances can be deceiving, Derek. Let's handle this professionally. Derek hesitated, but Robert's stern tone left no room for argument. Together, they returned to the showroom floor, where James was still standing by the car, seemingly impervious to the growing tension around him. Robert approached James with a polite smile, extending a hand. Good afternoon, sir. I'm Robert Campbell, the operations manager. I hear you're interested in purchasing the silver sports car? James shook his hand firmly. That's correct. Robert nodded. Mr. Hughes mentioned you're planning to pay in cash. If that's the case, we just need to verify some details to proceed. Of course, James said. I have all the documentation you'll need. He reached into his duffel bag and pulled out a neatly organized folder. Inside were bank statements, proof of identification, and other financial documents, all meticulously arranged and leaving no room for doubt. Robert's eyes widened as he scanned the papers. They weren't just legitimate. They spoke of substantial wealth and financial acumen. He glanced up at James, who watched him with a patient, knowing expression. Everything seems to be in order, Robert said after a moment. His voice was calm, but there was a hint of astonishment he couldn't quite conceal. Derek, standing just behind Robert, looked as though he had swallowed something bitter. His jaw tightened as he stared at the folder, realization dawning that James was, in fact, serious. Around the room, the atmosphere began to shift. The consultants and customers who had been watching from the sidelines now exchanged quiet murmurs, their earlier skepticism giving way to curiosity and a touch of shame. He wasn't bluffing, one whispered. I can't believe we all assumed. Another trailed off, her voice tinged with guilt. Emily Carter, still at the front desk, felt her stomach twist. She had been one of the first to judge James, and now she couldn't help but feel embarrassed by her initial assumptions. She watched as James stood tall, his dignity intact, while Derek and even Robert struggled to regain their footing. As Robert closed the folder and straightened, he addressed James with newfound respect. Mr. Foster, I'd like to personally apologize if we've given you any reason to feel unwelcome. It would be an honor to finalize this transaction for you. James nodded, his expression softening slightly. Thank you, Mr. Campbell. I appreciate that. Robert gestured toward his office. If you'd like, we can take care of the paperwork now. Before James could respond, Derek interjected, his tone still laced with bitterness. I just don't understand. Why here? Why this car? There are plenty of showrooms in the city. James turned to Derek, his calm gaze piercing. Because this isn't about the car. The room fell silent. Everyone, from the consultants to the customers, turned their attention to James, hanging on his every word. For years, James continued, his voice steady, but filled with quiet emotion, I've walked into places like this and been met with the same looks, the same tone, the same assumptions. People see my skin, my clothes, and they decide who I am before I even speak. Today, I wanted to remind everyone here, and myself, that worth isn't about what you wear or how you look. It's about who you are. His words hung in the air, heavy with truth. Derek's face turned red, and he looked away, unable to meet James's gaze. Robert stood silently, his expression contemplative, while the rest of the room seemed to collectively hold its breath. "What about you? Have you ever been judged unfairly based on how you looked?" Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's start a conversation about respect and understanding. The lesson James had come to deliver wasn't just for Derek. It was for everyone. But the story wasn't over yet. In the next moments, true depth of James's message would be revealed, leaving a lasting impact on everyone in the showroom. The luxury auto showroom was no longer a place bustling with sales pitches and idle chatter. Instead, it had transformed into an arena of quiet reflection. James Foster, still standing near the silver sports car, had turned the day into something far more profound than a transaction. The weight of his words lingered, resonating with everyone who had witnessed the exchange. Derek Hughes, once so confident and condescending, now looked visibly shaken. His arms were crossed tightly over his chest, but his expression betrayed a mix of shame and self-doubt. Robert Campbell, ever the professional, was the first to break the silence. "Mr. Foster," Robert said, his tone deeply respectful, "I've been in this business for decades, but I can honestly say I've never encountered someone who's made me think so deeply about what we do and how we do it. On behalf of this showroom and my team, I apologize, not just for today, for any time you've been made to feel less than you are." James regarded him with a small, gracious smile. "Thank you, Mr. Campbell. Apologies matter, but action matters more. It's how we change." Robert nodded solemnly. "You're absolutely right." Derek shifted uncomfortably, his gaze darting between Robert and James. Finally, he took a hesitant step forward. His voice, when he spoke, was quieter than anyone had ever heard it. "Mr. Foster," Derek began, his words halting and heavy, "I owe you an apology as well. I let my assumptions get the better of me. I judged you without knowing anything about you, and that was wrong. I'm sorry." James studied him for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. Then, to everyone's surprise, he extended his hand. "Growth starts with acknowledgement," James said. "I hope you'll remember this moment, and not just for me, but for anyone you meet in the future." Derek hesitated, then took James's hand. The handshake was brief, but the message behind it was undeniable. The paperwork was finalized swiftly, with Robert overseeing every detail personally. As James prepared to leave, Emily Carter approached him. She had been quiet throughout the ordeal, but now her emotions were plain on her face. "Mr. Foster," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I just wanted to say thank you. You didn't have to handle things the way you did, but you taught all of us something we needed to learn. I'm sorry if I was part of the problem." James gave her a kind smile. "It's never too late to learn, Emily, and it's never too late to do better." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears as she nodded, clearly moved. James walked toward the exit, his presence commanding the room without effort. As he reached the door, he paused and turned back to address the room one final time. "I came here today not for the car, but for the principle," he said. "Respect is not a luxury, it's a necessity. And if you take one thing away from this, let it be this. Treat everyone with the dignity they deserve, no matter how they look, no matter what you assume about them, because you never know the battles they've fought or the strength they carry." Room erupted into applause. Even Derek, his face still flushed with humility, clapped quietly. James offered a small wave before stepping outside, the sun casting a warm glow over him as he walked toward his new silver sports car. Inside, the staff and customers stood in stunned silence. Robert Campbell turned to the team, his expression resolute. "Let this be a turning point," he said, "not just for this showroom, but for each of us personally." James Foster reminded us of something fundamental today: the importance of empathy, humility, and respect. Let's honor that. Emily Carter nodded, wiping a tear from her cheek. Derek Hughes, still processing everything, took a deep breath and walked toward Robert. "I'll do better," he said quietly. Robert placed a hand on Derek's shoulder. "Good. Let's make sure we all do." Outside, James Foster slid into the driver's seat of his silver sports car, the engine purring softly as he started it. He sat for a moment, gazing out at the horizon, his heart full. This car wasn't just a purchase. It was a symbol of something far greater, a reminder that change was possible even in the smallest interactions. As he drove away, the Dublin city center streets unfolded before him, bustling with life and possibility. James felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that today he hadn't just changed minds, he'd changed hearts. What about you? Have you ever witnessed or experienced a moment where respect triumphed over prejudice? Share your story in the comments below. Let's keep the conversation going and remind each other of the power of kindness. James Foster's story wasn't just about a car or a showroom. It was a reminder that dignity is a right, not a privilege, and that sometimes the simplest gestures can create the most profound change. The end.